Hello, my name's Hannah Smith, and I'm going to be presenting my PowerPoint over the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. This act was signed into law on January 8th, 2002. So, a little bit of background on this law is the main goal was to raise 100% of students to proficiency level by 2014. And this proficiency level was determined by standardized testing that all the schools had to do. And then a few interventions that they put in place to reach this goal was number one, they wanted high quality teachers for all schools, and this just means that every teacher had a bachelor's degree in the subject that they were teaching. There's also federal funding, and it was used as an incentive for schools to meet their adequate yearly progress goals that are known as AYPs. So basically, how it works is if the schools meet their AYPs, they get the federal funding, but they can have the funding taken away if they routinely do not reach the AYP goals. And then along with the standardized tests, there was subgrouping data that they looked at, and this just highlighted disparities that we see in schools that have high levels of minority communities or students who have low socioeconomic status. And this was put in place to not allow schools being at an average proficiency level. It helped the kids who had these issues not fall through the cracks. A little bit of historical context. We're going to start out by talking about the political climate. So at the time, the president was George Bush, and it was a primarily Republican environment. The president identified as a Republican, the House majority was Republican, and then there was a rare tie in the Senate. Another thing that kind of led to this law being put in place is we knew that revision was needed for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was what preceded the No Child Left Behind. There were a couple of factors that played into this, and the first one is TIMSS data. TIMSS stands for Trends in International Math and Science Study, and it just looks at all the different countries that participate, and it gives each country a score on how well the students are doing in math and science. And this was particularly bad for the United States because we were doing significantly worse than a lot of other well-developed countries. So it was kind of a look in the mirror of we need to do better. And then also around this time in 1983, A Nation at Risk was published by the National Commission of Excellence in Education, and it basically just highlighted issues in America's education system, and it pointed out the importance of correcting the problems for the success of future America in all aspects, because if our young students are not doing well in school and aren't being properly educated, then when they grow up, they're not going to be able to run America efficiently. So those were just some things that let us know that we need to fix the education system. There were a few significant events that played into this law actually getting passed. One was President Bush was the president, and before he created this law, part of his campaign was he focused on public education. It was something he was passionate about and really cared to help fix. And then also along with this, kind of the big four at that time, that was what they were known as. It was Ted Kennedy, Judd Gregg, George Miller, and John Boehner. And they had a meeting with George Bush, and they decided that they wanted to all work together and actually make a plan and do something about the education issues that were happening in America. And this was really important because they didn't just want to make plans, they actually decided to work together and do something about the problem. 9/11, the attacks on the Twin Towers were also another important factor that helped get this law passed. It was really devastating at the time, but in the aftermath, it helped the United States government unite. Um, Both parties, Democrat and Republican, kind of just decided to put away their differences and issues that they had with this law, and they knew that they needed to pass it because it was what was best for America. So the No Child Left Behind Act, it provided a temporary solution to a big problem. It was always meant to be revised in 7 years anyways, but it did its job in the beginning. And one of its main successes was it identified disparities between students. Like we talked about earlier, it really focused on we talked about earlier how the standardized testing highlighted how particularly how minority communities and students with low socioeconomic status were doing. So it really brought to light how these specific subgroups were struggling and we needed to do stuff to help them. However, the No Child Left Behind Act really had a lot of cons because it needed revision. So first of all, it had unrealistic goals. We talked about how their main goal was to make all students reach proficiency levels by 2014, and it just had too many errors in it to make this happen at that set time. Also, there was unclear expectations. So it kind of caused teachers to be less focused on actually teaching the content to the children, and making sure that all of them learned and growed throughout the year, and it really focused on helping the children pass the standardized test at the end of the year. And this was good for the schools to get their funding, but it was bad because we need the students to actually learn, because that was the whole point of creating the law. Kind of going along with this, there was unfair resources without a good way to fix it, or like combat the issue. So basically what happened was the schools who met their AYPs every year were tended to be wealthier schools, and this is where high quality teachers who had a lot of experience wanted to be, because the schools were succeeding. But it kind of contradicted itself, because those high quality teachers really needed to be at the unsuccessful schools where the students weren't doing as well, and they needed the extra help with the extra experience. And then there was also strict consequences, going back to the funding we talked about. The schools who needed the funding the most were losing it because they weren't meeting their AYPs, but how are they supposed to do better and do the reconstruction if they don't have government funding to do it? So this led to a revision of the No Child Left Behind Act, and it's called Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015. This was signed into law by President Obama on December 10th of 2015, and it really helped fix a lot of the issues that we saw in No Child Left Behind. It allows for flexibility between states, so the states get to pick what the schools need instead of just using the universal rules set by the federal government. It promotes growth for all students, opposed to how No Child Left Behind just wanted everyone to reach proficiency. So it focused more on actually educating the students and making sure that they retain the knowledge instead of just doing the basic skills to pass the test. And more importantly, it was based on more than just standardized test scores. So this was a nice revision to No Child Left Behind.